There is no truth in the rumours that it's going to cost students £9,000 a year to log on to Facebook. And neither is there any truth in the rumour that Nick Clegg, the new SVP and man in charge of global affairs in Silicon Valley for Mr. Zuckerberg at Facebook, is going to form a coalition with MySpace and Bebo and call it To Facebook. There's no truth in any of these rumours, but there's lots of fun to be had. He's done well, Sir Nick Clegg, a knighthood, and now a residence in California, in Silicon Valley, the new Chief of Global Affairs. Mind you, if he is being paid in stock options, he'd be better to cash them in now, because the last mob he was in charge of lost almost all of its members of Parliament, lost 75% of its membership, lost some of its lustre. As my colleague Dan Wooten was just pointing out, Nick Clegg and Facebook were really, really popular in 2010. We'll be having some fun, not just with Sir Nick, but with the idea of politicians going through that revolving door. What would be the appropriate job for some of those? My colleague Tamer had a great one. If Theresa May had to leave office, the very thought of it, the very thought of Theresa May having to leave office, she could become a wheat farmer. That kind of gag, that's what I'm looking for, in writing or on the telephone. We'll be talking about Facebook and the public square, because he's got his work cut out for him, Sir Nick Clegg, because Facebook has suddenly become really, really unpopular. Let's take just one case in point. George Monbiot, the Guardian columnist, an insider, a part of the literary and journalistic establishment, had a video on YouTube that 1 million people had enjoyed, looking at Sir Christopher Columbus, pointing out the inconvenient truth that there were 100 million Native Americans when Columbus arrived, and just 200 years later, there were fewer than 1 million Native Americans alive. You can join the dots, you can do the maths. But George had a clear view on how that came about. He looked also at the British Empire and the crimes of in Kenya and elsewhere. It was a really popular video. I haven't yet seen it myself, but like millions of you, I'm now determined to, because the book that they ban always goes onto the bestseller list. Facebook took it down without explanation to George Monbiot, a milk and water green liberal. We're not talking a Bolshevik here. They took it down with no right of appeal. They are policing the public square, as are these other technology giants, in the interests of the powerful, in the interests of the prevailing orthodoxy, and they are exiling to the edges those with a different point of view. How's Nick Clegg going to spin that? Although, as one wag has just pointed out on Twitter, perhaps Mark Zuckerberg, like David Cameron before him, just needed somebody to make the coffee and do the photocopying. We'll be talking about Brexit and the very idea that Theresa May might be gone next week. It is perfectly possible that David Davis will be an agreed stand-in Prime Minister by next Friday. That means we'll be talking next Friday to a man that appeared in my documentary about Tony Blair and with whom I've been friendly for 30 years. He might be Prime Minister next week. Why? Because he can chew gum and walk in a straight line at the same time, neither of which attribute appears at the moment present in the form of our Prime Minister. We're talking about a woman who has almost overnight apparently lost the support of very substantial numbers of her own members of Parliament, albeit for diametrically opposed reasons. Some Tory MPs are against her because, despite being a Remainer, she is intending on, in one form or another, delivering the Brexit result that the referendum decided on. Others are against her for the opposite reason, that the Brexit she's going to come back with is not at all what they think the British people voted for. I speak, of course, on the eve of one of these soft shoe shuffles in central London, where the FBPE crowd, the Remainer crowd, with no dogs this time, it would appear, but the soft shoes and the waft of expensive cologne and chiffon scarves will be there in significant numbers, we're told. In fact, Alistair Campbell has insisted on BBC last night that the government must listen to the marchers in central London, which is passing strange because I was one of those at the front of a march of 2 million people in central London beseeching him and Tony Blair not to invade and occupy Iraq. And the same Alistair Campbell turned a deaf ear to all of us. On the subject of Alistair Campbell, in just half an hour before coming on this show, I conceived the idea of my next film, The Strange Death of David Kelly. And there's interest in it already from Netflix. And lots of you are queuing up to fund it. I promise you, Alistair, I will leave no stone unturned. We'll be talking also about crime in London. We'll be talking about the murder of a father of 2 in Battersea in London this week. Of course, he's one of a very large number of people murdered, but his case captured my imagination, not least because I used to live around the corner from where this crime took place. He was a lorry driver. He was 46. He had 2 children, and he was stabbed to death. And it's thought that that was because he confronted drug dealers operating outside his door in his street. We'll be talking about Windrush and why we're not talking about it anymore. We'll be challenging the colour of First World War memory. Did you know? Well, that's an OTOS question, because I know that you don't know. You don't know, and I didn't know until I read this book, that 4 million Asian and African soldiers were fighting for the British Army in the First World War. 4 million of them. And yet they have been airbrushed from the culture, from the popular memory of that war, the centenary of the ending of which, of course, we commemorate next month. We'll be talking also about, or I will, about Saudi Arabia and the hapless Jamal Khashoggii. I predicted here last week, and I think even the week before, I have been predicting from the rooftops that all has changed utterly in the wake of what is now generally accepted even by President Trump, the murder of a Washington Post columnist in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Some people say, well, why didn't people rise up over the deaths of children in school buses in Yemen? Why did people not rise up about the crucifixions, the beheadings, the cruel and unusual punishments for which Saudi Arabia has become infamous? And the reason is, dear listener, that no amount of Yemeni school children in this world of ours are worth a hair on the head of a Washington Post columnist, whom every congressman, every senator, every insider inside the Beltway knows as a personal friend. Some people said nothing would happen as a result, because Saudi Arabia is vastly rich and gives out arms contracts and controls the price of oil. I said, it is, it will. This is a bridge too far, even for the dictatorship in Saudi Arabia. And just like on so many other issues, I'm already being proved right. I have to say it's a monarchy and not a dictatorship. I'm not sure, Tamar, if there's a distinction or a difference in that. But I have to say it's a monarchy. What's the definition of a dictatorship? The definition of a dictatorship is one where nobody gets elected, and where one man or a family or a clique run everything. That sounds like Saudi Arabia to me. But I have to say, it's a monarchy. Saudi Arabia, the monarchy, just like Luxembourg and England.